Today we're going to cover the sculpt and detail work on this gigantic diorama. If you want to find out how we got to this point, watch part 1 where we constructed and magnetized the frame of the diorama.
Vasco Toys, action figure dioramas and props.
So in case you guys don't know, Carbon Scoring, who I'm making this diorama for, is something of a Marvel Comics historian. And on his YouTube channel, he focuses specifically on the comic panel history of characters like Spider-Man and how those connect to the history of the action figures that we've gotten from Hasbro, Toy Biz, and anybody else that's made those figures. He specifically loves Spider-Man, so what I am going to do is take a look at the inspirational structures from different forms of Spider-Man media. So the movies, some comics, so I've got a couple of collections that have different issues in them that I will be using to inspire the design of this diorama build. Trey from Carbon Scoring is a huge Steve Ditko fan, and unfortunately none of the books that I have Steve Ditko's artwork in them. However, he has an appreciation for all of the different Spider-Man artists that have worked on these books over the years. So one of my favorites is John Romita Sr. His work is in here. We're going to be looking at some of that and some other things. So let's take a look at it. So just opening this up, starting out, there's so many different things in these old Spider-Man comics. Now, I am not going to replicate the old color style for the buildings. This is a little bit too stylized for me. I want to blend this to be something of a comic and movie mixture in the design of my diorama. So I'm really more so looking at the structure of the buildings, how maybe the windows are indented, how the outside of the buildings are enclosed with these cinder block sort of scenarios and things like that. So I'm not really looking for color here. I'm more so looking for structure. So there's all kinds of cool things in here when you go through the pages, and I have a couple things marked. Some of the things that interest me are the brickwork. So we're going to be doing bricks on this build, and as you guys can kind of see here, there's a lot of really good reference material on the bricks and how they play into the look of the building. And you can see similar things here, right? So really, this is what we're looking at to try to get some inspiration for how the outside of this building should look. I finished printing all of my 3D printed windows, so now I'm just trying to map out where they'll appear on the walls. So one of the walls I want to be like an all window wall. So we've got my warehouse windows and then my 2-pane windows. So 3 of the warehouse and 4 of the 2-pane. And the way I normally do the warehouse windows is about 3 inches from the bottom. So I'm just spacing those out. And then I usually do, if I'm doing multiple stories, Riku on Instagram told me he does 5 or 5.5 inches between stories for 1/12 scale. So I like that measurement, and I'm going to use that here. I start out by outlining where I want my cuts to appear for my windows so that I know where to indent the cuts. Then I further define the outline of the window with an X-Acto blade. This will serve as a guide as I cut through the foam. Next, I take my 2-pane windows and I indent them in the foam where I want the cuts to occur. Those impression marks are what I use to cut against with my T-square to ensure that I'm going to get an exact cut that I need to fit these windows into. Now that the windows are cut, it's time to move on to our brickwork. If you're a fellow diorama artist, you know how tedious this process can be, but even though it can take a long time, it's important to put love and care into this and not rush through it, because this is really what's going to define the detail of our sculpt. What you're seeing me do is just mark out where our horizontal brick lines are going to occur. I'm going to use those markings to guide me to make sure that I am cutting straight lines that are perpendicular with the edge of the diorama. And these guidelines are really what's going to help me sell this as believable brickwork. I really recommend using a T-square here. When I first started out, I would use a ruler, and it was really difficult to make sure that my lines were actually perpendicular and straight that way. It's also important to check that the side of the diorama you're cutting against is a 90-degree angle. Otherwise, these cuts are not going to come out the way that you want them to. Okay, so now we're at a point where you can see where all the windows are going to be, and we have all of the horizontal lines going all the way up the piece for the brick. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually create the staggered brick lines that you guys will see next, the vertical lines. The first step is marking where you want your bricks to occur, and for 1/12 scale, I do 1 inch apart for this step. Once those lines are marked, I work my way up the diorama, skipping a row every time to get the staggered brick effect. Next, I make a mark every 1/2 inch. Then I use the T-square to work my way up the dio and define those marks. After all the cuts are made, I define the lines with a clay sculpting tool so that I can do mortar work after I've painted this piece. I start with the vertical lines and then I go with the horizontal, allowing me to erase any errors that I may have made when I made the vertical lines. Okay, so with the help of my clay sculpting tool, which I got at Dollar General, we now have fully indented bricks, and it's starting to look like a building. So the next step is going to be to cut out the windows, and then I'm going to texture the bricks and indent them and do some other cool things. Now that the bricks are fully defined, I've got to cut out my windows. So I start by tracing the spots that I already had outlined with an X-Acto blade. Then I take my box cutter and I do several more passes per window. Once I feel like I've almost broken through, I do a sawing motion to actually cut these windows out, and I go through to the other side almost completely in this process. So you guys can see the first 2 windows that I cut, I did a pretty good job on making sure that it was a 90-degree cut, and also that I was using a fresh blade. There is a little bit of fraying on the inside of this that I don't like, so to do the other windows, I'm going to get a new knife. Here's a closer look at what I do to get these windows out. As you'll notice, I do a couple of passes without the sawing motion, and then I go into the sawing motion to make sure I've got a full cut all the way through. So sometimes it's better to be lucky than to be good, and this is a case of that because I got really lucky on where I placed these windows because it lines up almost exactly with this piece that we installed in the last episode to rest the roof on. I did not plan it out this way, but I lucked out and we're going to be okay. So here it is, the piece with all the windows cut out. Now before I actually go in and test fit the windows, we're going to go in between each one of these columns and we're going to put all the brickwork, we're going to have the brickwork continue through on these bottom windows because these are, we're going to have sitting inside. For these ones, they're going to be on top like this, so you won't see the part that we just cut. This is the same process that we did before when we were carving the bricks on the front of the building, except now we're just doing it in the framing of the window to make it look like that brickwork continues all the way through. And now it's time to texture the foam. So I'm going to use a couple of different tools. I'm going to use a rolled up tinfoil ball right there. I'm going to use a wire brush, metal wire brush that you can get at the dollar store, and I'm also going to use a screwdriver, just a flathead screwdriver, and I'll show you guys how I do that. So we're going to start out with the ball of tinfoil and just want to get some good texture on the foam all the way through. And when you're doing these skinnier parts here, these are the most fragile parts of the diorama, so you just want to be careful as you're going over those spots that you're not putting too much pressure because you could break them if you do too much pressure. For this part of the process, you want to try to get full coverage and you want to get varying pressures as you go throughout because not all bricks would be uniform, so they're not all going to have the same level of impact. And don't forget to get some texture on the insides of these windows that we just did because we're going to want at least this part of the bricks to be showing. Now that the building is covered with the tinfoil texturing, I'm just going to take I'm not going to do a lot with the wire brush, but some bricks will have some like little porous kind of texture on them, so I'm going to just do that for a little bit of this. So far, it's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to go ahead and pick some bricks randomly. I'm going to use the flathead screwdriver that I had brought out, and I'm just going to push down certain bricks. And sometimes I push the whole brick down like I am right here. And sometimes I'll only pick a portion. So maybe if this brick is pushed all the way down, maybe this one just has a partial right there like that. I'm just going to go through the piece and try to find several that I want to do that effect with, which is going to help enhance the realism of the piece, and when we go to paint it, it's really going to make it look cool. And just in case you couldn't see what I was doing in the previous shot, here's a zoomed in shot where I am recessing some of these bricks. Okay, so off camera I went ahead and I added in all the 3D printed windows. I just did a dry fit. They're not glued in, just so we could get a sense of how this is going to look. And I love the way this texture is coming out. I love the recessed bricks that we have. I love the texture that we achieved from using that tinfoil and that wire brush. And I think once we get some paint on this, it's really going to pop. All the work that we've done so far on this piece has been on one of the diorama walls, and we still have 2 more to go. So here what I'm going to do is mark where I want double doors to be in the middle of the diorama. The typical door is 7 feet tall by 3 feet wide. This is a 1/12 scale diorama, so 1 foot in real life is 1 inch in the diorama. I want to do double doors here, so it's going to be 6 inches wide by 7 inches tall. After the door is defined, I go ahead and define where the door frame is going to be. To spare you all, I did the brickwork off camera. If only it was that easy. Then I went ahead and cut out the door that we had defined. Time to add some decorative pieces to the brickwork, so I'm using my Proxxon to cut some trim pieces. The trim pieces that I'm creating are actually meant to be a layer of brick on top of the brick that we just made. So I'm just marking these out 1 inch at a time. After that, we just add a little bit of texture and we're good to go. I just take that trim piece and I hot glue it into place using the brick line to guide me. And I think I want to add the same thing to the top portion of this, so I apply that as well. After that, I added these vertical brick lines every 4 brick spaces to the diorama. And I wanted to continue the design around the building, so that's what you see me doing here. That includes the little vertical pieces that we just looked at. Off camera, I also cut these little window sills that I wanted to put in place. I decided to add these only to the 2 pane windows all the way around the building. So real quick, guys, I did off camera finish the back wall, and I didn't do anything new on here, so you guys have seen all the techniques that I've already done for the window cutouts and for this trim work and of course the brickwork. So nothing new there, and that's going to be the last portion of our exterior wall. One other thing I did off camera is create these the pieces that are going to connect the 2 front-facing and back-facing decorative roof pieces are going to be these brick pieces. So I've got them, they're 360, well they're not exactly 360, but I didn't do the bottom part, but that is going to be glued to the diorama, so I'll show you guys how that looks on there. For this part, I'm only going to hot glue this one piece to this one side because this entire wall that I'm gluing this to is now going to be painted the same color and the mortar will be done all at the same time. So it makes sense on this side, but it doesn't make sense on the other side where we have the hollow piece without the wall. That's going to do it for part 2 of this diorama build series where we looked at all the detail and sculpt work. If you liked the video, please subscribe to the channel so you see part 3 where we're going to tackle the paint work for this piece. Thanks. See you next time.